Welcome to day 15 of 14 days of prayer. This is a bonus episode, and as Pastor Tim talked about this past week, earlier on this week, that we're going to be doing this more, as we've just seen and heard from you how impactful it's been. What I wanted to do is I wanted to draw our attention to Psalm 77 as you start your day today. Psalm 77 is a psalm of lament, and this past week there was an article written in Time by author, his name is N.T. Wright, really well known in theological circles, a theological heavyweight, if you will. And he talks about in this article how Christianity offers the world the ability to lament and to find sadness and to really experience the loss of this season. And that's what the Psalms offer us over and over and over again, are Psalms of lament. And so Psalm 77 starts by saying this: I cry aloud to God. This is a community lament, but somebody speaking on behalf of the community. The first 9 verses of this psalm are full of disappointment. He says, I cry, I moan, my soul refuses to be comforted. In verse 3, it says, when I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. He says, in verse 6, he says, I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. Then my spirit made a diligent search. He says, will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased and his promises at an end for all time? And so the author of this psalm is just pouring out his angst, his questions to God. And I think we need to do the same. Verse 9, if he finishes by saying, has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in his anger shut up his compassion? I don't know, it was really helpful for me this past week to list, as I have here in the journal or in the margins of my Bible, just all of the things that I miss, that I'm grieving, that I am lamenting from. Verse 10, there's a shift. He says this, he says, I will appeal to this, to the years of the right hand of the Most High. He says, I'm not just going to lament, I'm also going to consider, as we looked at last weekend in our weekend gatherings in James 1, I'm going to remember, I'm going to call to mind the actions, the character of God. So that's the hinge point, is when he turns his attention now from his own experience to God and what he knows of God. So verse 11 to the end, he is meditating and calling to mind his actions. And so in verse 11, it says, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Verse 12, I will ponder. Verse 13, your way, O God, is holy. Verse 14, you are the God who works wonders. You are the one who has redeemed. I think in this time, yes, we need to feel the gravitas, the weight of this moment. We also need to call to mind and then specifically recount the ways that God has been faithful. He talks about, from verses 16 to the end, he talks about how creation is bowing and it is in obedience to who God is. So there's power in God as well. So here's what I would encourage you to do today based on the outline of Psalm 77. First thing, you write a letter to God. And in this letter, the first thing I want you to do is to start with your current state. What are you missing? Maybe it's the idea that you don't have the community that you had before. Maybe you're not tech savvy. Maybe this whole online world is difficult for you and you just miss being with people. You're lonely. Talk to God about that. Maybe you're trying to figure out homeschooling with 1, 2, 3, 4 kids and that is not going well. Maybe it's just the new realities of working from home or the things at work that you were looking forward to in the spring that you've had to cancel. You need to start with the invitation of the psalmist and be open with the Lord. What are you missing? What's going on in your life? What are you worried about? What questions do you have for God? Be honest, be reflective. If so, lament. Bring these to God. Second thing is, like it did in verse 10, Call yourself to remember and to consider. Think back on the last 90 days of your life. How has God been real to you? What's he showing you in the last 90 days? I think that there is power in reflection. We don't do it often as a culture. So reflect. How has God been real to you in your last 90 days, the last 6 months, the last year? And call yourself to remember and consider. And then, as the psalmist does, he actually recounts specifically the ways or the character or acts or deeds of God. And this is what I want you to do. And the last bit is to recount the specific ways that he has shown himself to be true and to be faithful to you. What promises of God do you need to claim right now? What scriptures do you need to recite? Verses that you need to memorize? Ways that you can remind yourself of you're not alone in this season, that God is actually in control, that he loves you, that he is for you, that Jesus has died and rose again, which is the bedrock of our faith, a historical event that solidifies us, that unites us to God, and this is the hope that we have. So, 3 things. Start with your current state. Write a letter to God. Start with your current state. Second, call yourself to remember and to consider. And number 3, recount those specific ways that God has and what you're asking him to do in your life right now. Thanks for journeying with us.